So, today we're diving into a plant that is just a walking paradox. On one hand, it's one of the most infamous poisons in history, but on the other hand, some people see it as a major remedy. So what is it, a killer toxin or a powerful healer? Well, let's get into it.
To really wrap your head around aconite, you have to start with just how incredibly potent it is. I mean, this quote from Maud Grieve really says it all, doesn't it? She doesn't mince words. We're talking about a minuscule amount of its active compound, aconitum, having an absolutely devastating effect, and fast.
And for a human? Wow. It only takes about 3 to 6 milligrams. That is a tiny, tiny fraction of a gram to be lethal. This is not a plant you mess around with, and its fearsome reputation is, let's just say, very well earned.
So you can probably guess, with that kind of deadly power, aconite has a pretty dark and legendary past. It's a plant that's been feared and, well, used for its deadly properties for centuries, popping up all over in history and in folklore.
You know, the names alone tell you pretty much everything you need to know. The scientific name, aconite, comes right from the Greek word for dart, which is a pretty big hint about its use on weapons. And its common names are just as revealing. Monkshood because of the shape of its flower, and then the much more sinister one, wolf's bane, which tells you exactly what it was used for.
And yeah, that history is basically written in poison. For hundreds of years, it was the go-to for tipping arrows, for hunting, and for warfare. That name, wolfsbane, it's chillingly literal. They would coat bait with it to kill wolves. And maybe the most fascinating part? It was a key ingredient in the legendary flying ointments you hear about in witchcraft folklore.
Okay, so how in the world did that flying sensation supposedly work? Well, the pharmacology behind the legend is pretty wild. The aconite would cause a racing, irregular heartbeat. Then another ingredient, belladonna, would bring on delirium. You put those two together, and that combination of intense physical and mental effects would create this profound, disorienting feeling that was probably interpreted as, well, flying.
And this is where the story just takes a complete 180. It's really the central question we have to ask, right? How does something so feared, so known as a fast-acting poison, get turned into a remedy that was trusted for common sicknesses, even for kids?
Well, the answer really comes down to one person who looked at this deadly plant through a completely new lens and decided to challenge centuries of what everyone thought they knew. The big turning point was in 1805, thanks to Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, who you might know as the founder of homeopathy. He published his study on aconite, working from his core principle of like cures like. The basic idea is that a substance that causes symptoms in a healthy person could, in a super diluted form, treat similar symptoms in someone who's sick. And based on that, he believed he'd unlocked its healing potential, completely reframing one of nature's most notorious poisons. And in this new system, aconite wasn't just some fringe idea. It became a total cornerstone. This little ABC comparison shows how it was viewed. Aconite, which causes cardiac turmoil in poison doses, was used for issues of circulation, like a sudden fever. So that's your A. It was often right there alongside B for belladonna, another poison, used for conditions affecting the brain. It's a fascinating framework.
But look, aconite's use here isn't just random. According to the source material, it's for a very specific set of circumstances, and it all revolves around one core theme: sudden, intense onset.
This right here paints a really vivid picture. We're talking about illnesses that come on like a thunderstorm, a sudden, raging fever, a panic attack that comes out of nowhere, or these sharp, just intolerable pains. The common thread is always intensity. The sudden, violent start is matched by extreme tension, this really deep sense of fear, and an anxious restlessness that just takes over your mind and your body. So what kicks all this off? Well, the source points to some very specific triggers. The classic one is getting blasted by a dry, cold wind, and then bam, you've got a sudden cold or fever. But it also covers emotional or physical shock, the after effects of a sudden scare, an accident, or some kind of injury.
Let's drill down on one of the key symptoms: fear of death. For aconite, the fear is described as acute, panicked. The person is just convinced they're going to die. They might even predict the time, and they want a doctor right now. Now, this is totally different from the despair that's associated with arsenic
or the fear that's really just driven by intense pain, which is linked to rust tox.
And you see that same level of detail when we talk about restlessness. The aconite state is all about this anxious, energetic tossing and turning. The person just cannot stay still. Now compare that to arsenic, where the mind is racing but the body is just too weak to move. Or rust tox, where all the movement is just a constant attempt to find a position that eases the physical pain. See the difference? Which brings us right back where we started, to that central theme. We've now seen both sides of this incredibly powerful plant.
First off, there's just no denying its identity as a poison. In its natural state, aconite is swift, it is potent, and it is unequivocally dangerous. Its whole history as wolfsbane and as a poison for weapons is a powerful testament to that raw, deadly power.
And yet, as we've just seen, that exact same substance, when you look at it through a totally different philosophical and methodological lens, is framed as the #1 solution for the very same kind of violent, sudden shocks it can cause. It's almost a perfect mirror of its own effects. Ultimately, the story of aconite really forces us to wrestle with a fundamental question. Where do you draw the line between a substance that harms and one that heals? Is it about the substance itself, the dosage, the intention behind its use, or is it the philosophy you bring to it? It's a question that really gets to the very heart of medicine, both ancient and modern.